No, I didn't get that. It's not in my inbox. It was in an envelope?
Yeah, just like this.
Okay, maybe I took it home then.
That's what I think.
Okay, I think I took it home. Thank you very much. It's great stuff. The word gets good, but I know it's okay. Yes. Oh, of course. We were sitting out there listening.
No.
We got to listen to this. I would like to call this 2 p.m. workshop meeting to order. Can we please have the roll call?
Councilmember Gama,
Here.
Councilmember Rollins. Yes. Councilmember Munoz-Snop.
Here.
Noting the absence of Mayor Pro Tem Hernandez, Mayor Berg.
Here. And let the record reflect that Mayor Pro Tem Hernandez will be momentarily delayed. She'll be here momentarily, though, very, very soon. Do we have any public comments? Anybody in the public like to make a comment? We've set aside 10 minutes for that. Not seeing anybody here. Thank you very much. No comments. So we now go to our business item, which is the regeneration of the water rates workshop. We're finally seeing this again. Hopefully we can get through this in 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours, and then move along. So anyway, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Mayor and City Council members, my name is Steve, and I'm with Raftellus. We're a consulting firm of about 70 consultants, and we help water and wastewater agencies across the country plan financially and set water and wastewater rates. So as you know, we've been working with your staff. I think it's been since 2016 now. We've been working on this water rate study, and what I have for you today is a presentation that will bring you up to speed. And then I have proposed rates for you to consider. And ideally today, you would at least be prepared next time at a minimum to make a decision. But I guess I'm looking at your staff. You could also provide direction today onto whether or not we should move to the Prop 218 process if you like the rates and the bill impacts. So here's our agenda. We're going to recap where we left off, a little bit of history and background. We're going to review the proposed rate structure changes. We're going to review the proposed rates and probably most importantly, how it affects your customers. And I understand it's just me today, so we can go as slow or as quickly as you want. You can interrupt during the presentation and ask questions if you like. If you need me to repeat anything, please let me know. So the goal today would be, ideally, it would be to get direction from you, should we proceed with Prop 218. If for some reason you need to take a step back and consider things, then there is budget for me to come back and present again and then get a decision, if you will.
Are you going to tell the group, because there's 3 new folks but 2 are here, what Prop 218 actually means?
Yeah, Prop 218 was passed in 1996, and it says a couple of things. It says your rates needs to be based on your costs. So no more, I shouldn't say no more, but you can't pick rates out of the air. You have to have a logic and a reason. And then once you decide on rates, you have to do what's known as a public hearing, a Prop 218 public hearing. So you have to send out a public notice to all your customers, wait 45 days, and then have a public hearing where you summarize the proposed rates and talk about the customer impacts. And then the public gets to do what's known as a protest hearing. If you get 50% plus 1 of your customers protesting the rate increase, then you cannot increase rates. And of course, if you get anything below that, then you can choose to increase rates.
Thank you.
Sure. So a year has passed since I was here last, and I thought it would be, since a year has passed, it made sense to freshen up the model, if you will. So we asked your staff for your latest fiscal year 2018 reserve balances. we asked for your 2018 actual expenses and revenue, and we asked for your 2018 water sales, so that we could make this model up to date, and it's not something that was done a year ago. So you're looking at something outdated. Yes?
Are you talking about the water enterprise fund reserves or the general fund?
Water.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So when we got the RFP for this project, there were what we've called special questions, 5 special questions. And I'm going to recap those because I'm assuming that they still want to be addressed. So I'm going to go through those 5 special questions now. This is the first one, was I understand at some point in the past the city was not paying for its water that it used, and so the question was posed, well, how much does the city owe for water? We did some calculations, and we believe it's on the order of approximately $800,000. So the question was, shall we reduce the principal? So there was a loan that was made by the general fund to the water fund. And the question was, shall we reduce the principal owed to the general fund by approximately the amount that is owed by the city? And by the way, I'm recapping things, so I'm not necessarily saying that this is the decision, but I'm letting you know where we left off. So,
Can you clarify, is that 800,000, is that to make the city pay for the water they used for the past X amount of years, or is it for something other than
yes,
that?
so it's just 1 year. To my understanding, and I'll preface it by saying I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is that the city can only go back 1 year. I would look to your attorney to make that ultimate decision. But in the attorneys that I work with, BB&K, have told me in the past that retroactive reimbursements can only be for 1 year. So this is 1 year's worth of back pay, if you will.
And I think it was, just to clarify that, I think it was because there were some water meters that were not working properly at some of our public parks and public spaces for the city.
Yeah, and this is, I don't want to say it's common, but this is, I've seen this before. Some water agencies or cities.
Just to
And it was
clarify.
also, unless I'm mistaken, for a long time, for a long time, and this was true of a lot of cities until maybe the last 10 years, the city would not charge its own departments for water use. And there was a feeling that wasn't fair, that they should have been paying for the water that they used. So that was a component of it as well.
Right, that's it exactly. So when we come across this, and we still are coming across this, we recommend that the city start paying for its water. So the answer for that was no, that we will just let that be. The city is now paying for its water, but we were going to let that lie.
I had a question. If the city pays for its own water, doesn't the taxpayer eventually pay because they pay for the city expenses anyway? Or what's the differential? I mean, if we're paying for our water, the taxpayers are paying for the operation of the city. Is that correct or wrong?
Yeah, I think the argument that more and more cities are accepting now is that each program really should, whether it's enterprise fund or whether it's a general fund, should bear the costs and pay the cost of the water, because that reflects the true cost of operating that facility or that park or that program. So especially in light of Prop 218, where, it's the whole purpose is to try to set your rates based on actual costs and, not have subsidizing going on, that more and more cities now are charging that exact cost to the extent that it can be determined.
Yeah, and it's more transparent.
So the rate that the public was paying was subsidizing the city.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
If I can just expand a little bit on that. By law, enterprise funds have to be treated as separate entities, and so they're standalone. The enterprise fund on the water is what receives the rates and pays the expenses. So if the city is not paying for its own water, then the water users are subsidizing the city, not all of the citizens. And not all citizens contribute equally or have the same amount of pay-in for water. Some of them may conceivably use almost no water, but they're still subsidizing the city's water. So by law, actually, it's not just good public policy, by law, the city should be paying its enterprise funds for the services it gets, and then those funds charge the users, including the city, for whatever services they get in the amount that those cost, which is the Prop 218 requirements. You can only charge what your service more or less costs. That's the rule of thumb. So in looking at this, it's really important to remember that we have different pockets, which is one of the odd things about government is you know, you've got your general fund, which is what we would all think of as our checking account. But then you've got these special funds, which you really have special restrictions on. And all Steve's talking about today really is the Enterprise Water Fund, which is a special fund. So we just need to keep that division in mind so that we get.
Right.
For clarification for the city council, that $800,000 dealt with parks and the media and the water that was used. We are now metering that, and we are paying general fund money is being transferred to the
Water.
water department to pay for the usage.
Yeah.
So that's what had not
Thank
been
you.
done before.
Thanks.
Thank you. Steve?
If I may, so my HOA's biggest expense is water. And so what I'm hearing is that the information going back out to the community is now the city is paying for its water, for its parks, for the front area here, like every
Medians.
other medians, like every other HOA homeowner in the city.
Yes.
Correct, under the same methodology. So any rate increase or decrease is going to be felt by all the
Yes.
participants.
They may have a different rate, and we'll get into that, but they are paying for their water. Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. So, special question number 2. Back in 2008, the general fund made a loan to the Water Enterprise Fund. It was at a rate of 5%, which made sense back in 2008 before the housing crash. Back then, treasuries were just shy of 5%, 4.8, I think, and you don't have the backing and the taxing power of the federal government, so you would be expected to pay more. So 5% was okay for 2008, but as you know, interest rates went down. So the question that we were asked, shall we refinance the loan to 3.1%, and that was the 20-year treasury rate back in February of 2018, to 3%. So this is just like refinancing the loan on your house. The answer at the time was yes, we should do that. And this means less revenue being paid back to your general fund. I understand that some revenue to the general fund but back when I was here a year ago, it wasn't looking too strong, so to speak, but I understand things are looking better now. I think I'll just leave it at that. The answer for this was yes, we shall refinance the loan.
Steve?
What was the principal balance of that loan?
It's in my model. I don't remember it offhand. I think it would be best if I could just take that question and I can let you know at the end. Unless, Ken, you happen to know offhand. Yeah, okay.
Question 3.
So question 3, shall we shut down the reverse osmosis treatment system? Your former water operations manager, Steve Hickox, and I studied this, and even if we were to shut that down, there are still many other things that still need to run, pumps and so on, and treatment. You may not be using the RO system, but there's still things that need to be paid for in the plant. So this doesn't save a heck of a lot of money, and it creates higher quality water. So the decision was to leave the RO system on.
Some of you may recall your neighbors complaining about the water quality, color, and things like that. Those were times when the reverse osmosis was not functioning or had been turned off for one reason or another. So the reverse osmosis cleans that water once again. So in general, we're getting better water because of that.
My understanding is that when the water levels are low, that the reverse osmosis system or the filter cannot be used when the water is at its lowest level, and when the water ideally is at its dirtiest.
Yes.
I'll answer that. There's silt density index. We get our water mix approximately 80% from United Water and 20% from Cayugas. The water from United is less expensive water, first of all, because Cayugas water is state water. State water is very clean. But that water comes over to us. In times of drought, they have to pump from the lower wells, which have higher particulates. The silt density index goes up, and the threshold is 3. When it gets over that, if we run the membranes, it's going to start fouling them and damage them in the long run. So that's when we shut it down. Fortunately, a couple of good things. One, we've had a very good winter, and during the winter, normally water demand is down, so they don't have to draw from the lower wells. So we get better quality water, and we can run the reverse osmosis. And also, United Water has put in their capital budget plan approximately $5 million to build a iron and manganese removal plant at the headlands. So if this goes through, then it won't matter if they're pumping from the lower wells, because they'll be removing the particulates that raise the silt density index, which means we'll be able to function almost all the time.
And for your own information, I think it's the three of you here with Sylvia that are on the Port Hueneme Water Agency. Akbar is a wealth of information on these formulas and stuff, so stay close to him.
Akbar used to work for us. Okay, so there's 5 questions, and if I had to say which one is the most important, it's special question number 4. They all matter, but some matter more than others. This one has the greatest impact. It's basically how much shall the city invest in replacing its pipes and capital, buried infrastructure. So you have a water master plan, and in it, it has a number of projects. And all of those projects sum to about $35 million in 2017 dollars. And they have 8 projects, and what we decided to minimize the impact on customers is we would spread that total cost, $35 million, over 12 years. So you're going to execute the projects in that capital plan over 12 years instead of 8 years. Because if you spend more, that'll increase rates. Or if you do more faster, that'll increase rates. So essentially, it means that you're spending, if we take $35 million and divide by 12 and then also inflate it, you're spending about, oops, oh, I pressed the wrong button. I wanted to hit the highlight button. Here we go. Let me hit the highlight. So right here is about $3 million a year in capital projects. It goes up a little bit because you're inflating it every year because construction costs are going up every year. So just to give you a bit more perspective, the American Water Works Association calls the next 20 or 25 years, they call it the replacement era. And they're calling it the replacement era because we as a nation, our water and wastewater systems are all roughly the same age, 50, not the same exact age, but 50 to 100 years old. And pipes and stuff, depending on the pipe, depending on what it's made out of, when it was made, pipes last about 75 to 100 years. And everything's about 75 years old. So as a nation, we're all going to have to start reinvesting into water and wastewater infrastructure. So this question, how much do we want to spend, how much do we want to raise our rates, is something that every community is dealing with. Any questions here before?
Yeah, the graph starts at 2017, but we're already in 2019 now. So how can we reconfigure this to
It's $3 million a year.
start?
roughly.
Okay, and the first year in 2019, if we were to begin this year, would be 900,000?
No, that's past. I wouldn't even look at fiscal year
Don't even look at that
17.
anymore. Okay,
Yeah,
close
I
those
should've-
off, and then just go straight 3 million a year now to start
Yep,
with.
well, and so this is what's in the model. I mean, you have to put it into practice in the field. You have to execute contracts, hopefully you're executing contracts to the tune of $3 million a year.
Okay, do you know what the balance of our reserve is right now for this?
Your capital reserve?
Yes,
Your total reserves, I can, in a couple slides, you'll see your total reserves.
okay,
which
that's
is
good,
about-
thank you.
Okay.
And then the 910 for the first year, that was for the design, I believe, wasn't it, Don?
Correct.
That's why it's lower.
We've already spent it?
No, well, no, we have not, we have not. I'm getting a proposal, some proposals for, design of some pipeline replacements.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
So it
gonna be
wasn't-
I'll be coming back to council in the summer to award those contracts for design.
So
Are
it
you-
wasn't like breaking ground on that 910, it was just the
are
design
you gonna be
work.
talking to our new council members too about really what that involves, what we're talking about?
The specific projects?
Yeah.
I would defer that to Don, because I
Okay.
don't know.
Before we leave, Don,
I
give
guess-
them a heads up.
I understand, Don, did he give you this? It probably should be in here. This is a.
Is that right? It's in there?
summary of your-
Is this, what I provided to council earlier in the week was a cover letter, and then the executive summary that I provided at earlier workshops. Come down to the mic so this gets recorded. What I provided to council earlier was, in the week, a cover letter and the executive summary of the water master plan as edited by me with some highlighted things which identified what our water system consisted of, the key elements of the water system, and that was to give you an overview in preparation for this workshop. And then I also gave you a CD with the entire water master plan. It's too voluminous to email, so you had to get the CD of it. I can make hard copies if anybody wants it, but it details the things. And the first one that's in there is we have a 14-inch ductile iron pipe that goes up to, that runs up Ventura Road and is the water supply for the north side of the city. And I proposed a project to give us a redundancy on that, and I can go into that later.
Okay, thank you.
I think one thing that comes to mind in that water master plan is, it's been a while since I've read it, but there's a section that says you are, sections of the city are deficient in fire flow and fire pressure. So executing these projects to correct that is important.
And that's primarily the north end,
Okay.
yeah. Where you live.
Special question number 5. This one is also an important one because it tackles the issue of your rate structure. And the question is, how much fixed revenue shall the city collect through its rate structure? And this affects a customer's bill, because if you have a high fixed charge which is not based on how much water you use, then every month that customer pays that much amount, that bill, regardless of how much water they use. So varying the amount of fixed revenue you collect through fixed charges affects your customer bills quite a bit. You are currently at, if you'll allow me to round, roughly 60% of your revenue is collected through a fixed charge, which means your fixed charge is fairly high. The Southern California average is somewhere around 30%. And so when I was here last time, we were talking about, well, what do you want to do? And so we had 3 areas: leave it alone, 30% to be like the average, and a midpoint. The city chose to do what I'll call is the average in Southern California. Realize it's different everywhere, okay? But the rate structure you're going to see collects roughly 30% of your revenue through a fixed charge and 70% through a volumetric charge. So what this is going to do, because your fixed charge was higher, is it promotes affordability, which was a key concern of the prior city council. So this is good for affordability, and you'll see that both in the rates and in the bill impacts.
I have a question. So the water district, I believe it has a reserve that built up over time. Is that correct?
Yes, it has an O&M reserve and a capital reserve.
Okay. And so when it comes to these capital projects, let's say that there's 30 million in reserves. I don't know what that number is.
You'll see in a second.
Okay. So my question is then those reserve dollars that have been built up over time, when we go to expend them on a capital project, do you then recoup it in rate increases?
Yes, you strive to maintain a certain amount of in reserve, a capital reserve
Right.
and an O&M reserve.
Okay, so my question is, it's like, it almost seems like double taxation on the ratepayers. Because on the one hand, you've been paying, say if you've been here for 30, 40 years, you're paying, and this reserve balance is being built up as a result of the ratepayers. And then now, if you have $30 million built up, then you go to do these capital projects, then you're gonna collect that 30 million through a rate increase? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, you strive to have a certain amount in reserve. I would say you're not double taxing. The reason why you have a reserve is for a couple of reasons. One, for an emergency.
Right.
Two, to execute contracts, you normally have to have, if the city's about to let out a $3 million contract, you want to have those funds in reserve.
Correct.
So it's for emergency purposes and for contracting purposes. You should have a capital reserve and an O&M reserve. An O&M reserve is for working capital. Maybe if your billing system went down for a month or two, you need capital to continue to run your operations, and normally that's 3 months of work, 3 months of O&M. And your capital reserve is normally for most, it varies again by agency, but it's normally 1 year's worth of capital projects. So you saw that you're doing about 3 million a year. On average, you would hold 3 million in reserve, but we'll see in a second that the city has decided to hold 1.7 million in reserve, which is lower because they want to promote affordability. So when you have a lower reserve, you can have lower rates.
So,
I also want to let you all know, in case you didn't, is that in 2008, 2009, we were just coming off the water meter installation, and it was at that time we did, this original rate study, and we had not been setting aside as a water enterprise group money for capital improvement or maintenance, and it wasn't until we addressed it in 2008, 2009, in those years, that we actually started to set aside money because the city had nothing at that point. So it's not that we've had reserves for 30 years, we've only had reserves for maybe 10 years. Okay. So I just want you all to factor that in as well. Right. We're playing catch up right now.
Yeah, and I was consulting to your neighbor here, and apparently they were in dire financial straits at one time, and so they elected to increase their rates to make sure that they have the right amount of reserves. So right now you only have O&M and capital reserves. Some agencies have O&M, capital, emergency, and a rate stabilization reserve, because if you hit a drought, your revenue is going to tank and you need to continue to, paying your bills. So some agencies have what's known as a rate stabilization reserve that they can dip into during a drought instead of increasing your rates. So I'd say the city with its O&M and capital reserve is, most agencies have an O&M and a capital reserve. Emergency and rate stabilization reserves are a bit rare. So you're right, you're doing what the average agency does by having those two reserves. Okay, so this talks about reserves. We modified your capital reserve because, again, the goal when I was here last time was affordability. So I'm not sure how the city came up with it, but it was set at 7.5% of asset value using reproduction costs less depreciation. This creates a capital reserve goal, again, I'll round around, of about $2 million, which is close enough to the 3 million. I just wanted to state here that this, again, is a measure to promote affordability in your rates. So now we're on to the concept of revenue adjustments. So when we do a rate study, the first thing we decide before we even talk about rates is we try to answer the question, how much money do you need every year? So this is what I had put forth at one time in front of the old city council, again, because affordability was a concern. The city, at the bottom here, at the bottom of this table, what this is essentially saying is that the city will not change the amount of revenue it's collecting for 2 years, 2 fiscal years, fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21. And then afterwards, for fiscal year 22 to 24, it would implement what I'll call inflationary increases. 3% is roughly inflation, long-term inflation. Okay?
So we're saying rates will not increase for 2 years.
We're saying your revenue will not increase for 2 years. Your rates are going to change because we're changing how the city is charging customers, and we're going to go through that. But what we're saying is your revenue won't change. So, how could I think you understand, but to use an analogy, it's, you're going to the same restaurant and ordering the same meals, but instead now of dividing by 4 people at the restaurant, you're taking out the bill and you're calculating exactly what everybody owes. So people will pay a little different because we're changing the rate structure, but the total bill is still the same. That's all I want to say there.
Very good analogy.
So these are your reserves, okay? So you can see here, right here, your total reserves, this includes capital and O&M. Somebody had this question earlier. You have about 14 million in reserve, and that's capital and O&M. And this, yeah?
Is this 14 million money that we could theoretically start the projects with?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to give you what I see quite often is that sometimes small agencies or small water districts, sometimes they have the money, but they're a little bit slower to execute. So it just means, yes, you can, and you've got to get the staff in place to execute the projects.
So it looks like we have half the money to get started. And as we continue to build up funds, then we would actively be using funds that are coming in almost at the end of all this in 2024, 25, something like that.
It looks like we're drawing down a little faster than what we're bringing in, but we still are flush. We still are positive at the end.
Yes, so you can see the blue bar, that's your O&M reserve target at the bottom of that graph. So you're striving, it's not quite 2 million. You're striving to hold roughly 2 million in reserve, that's your O&M reserve. And then if you add to that your capital reserve, which is 1.7, then in total, you're striving to hold in reserve just something shy of 4 million. That's the red line. And this is the scenario where you're assuming that you're refinancing the debt at 3.1%. And the top graph shows your expenses in the bar chart, and then your revenue is in the line, the green and red line. And so looking at, let's say, fiscal year 2022, you got the blue line, that's your water supply costs, I guess that's peach at the top there, that's your CIP. So your 2 biggest expenses in a typical year are your cost to get water and then your CIP. And you can see at the bottom there's a little bit of green. That means that you're dipping into reserves to meet your total expenses. Okay, so this is called an operating deficit, and that's why the bottom graph, your reserves are going down. But you can see at the end of, in fiscal year 2024, you're still okay. You're still above your reserve target.
And clarification on debt refinancing, that is the debt that is owed to the city.
Yes. So you're still paying it, you're just
Right.
paying it at a lower interest rate.
Right.
Steve?
Yeah.
Can you define CIP for us?
Capital Improvement Program.
Okay.
It's the projects, things like replacing a sewer line or a big project at your RO plant. Or
If I'm not mistaken, that's the money put aside, in addition to O&E, operations and maintenance, O&M?
yes.
And then there's the CIP. They're not the same.
You have O&M expenses, and then you have capital expenses. So in that top graph, there's a blue area. Everything but the peach-colored area at the top of the graph is what I would call, it's O&M, there's debt service in there. I think you can see it's like a rose-colored.
Yep.
That's debt service. And then You've got water supply costs, which is the blue, and then I think it's a purple. You have other costs, that's like salaries and electricity and supplies and so on. We usually don't classify it as O&M. It's not capital. Right, it's not capital. Yeah. So I thought perhaps you might have the question, well, what if we don't refinance the debt? So I'm showing you the reserve balances here if you don't refinance the debt. So you can see the bottom graph. If you remember, your ending balance in the prior slide was 10 million. And if you don't refinance the debt, you're still okay. You're at 8 million. You can see your reserve balances are a little lower here. So essentially, I use the term that the city is buying down rates because you have reserves. You have 2 years of 0% revenue adjustments. You're essentially buying down rates for 2 years and then going on with the 3%. If it helps you at all, in about a decade of consulting, to have 2 years of 0% revenue adjustments is very uncommon.
Uncommonly good or uncommonly bad?
Depends
I
on what
haven't
side
seen
of the table.
Many
you're on.
clients don't do it. Or I should say they don't do it intentionally. So there's a difference. They sort of forget about their water rates for a number of years, and then all of a sudden they're in a deficit, and they're like, oh my God, we need a rate study. But when they do a rate study, to have 2 years of 0% revenue adjustments is very uncommon. And in the 10 years, I think I've seen only 2 agencies actually lower their rates. So,
Did I get an answer to my question? Is it uncommonly good or uncommonly bad?
depends on your perspective.
Okay. We can talk later.
Okay, so the next few
Good for the
slides talk about how we
Yeah,
set
let's
rates. I think I'm
go
going to
for
stay
them.
at a high level here. I could go into detail if you have any questions, but it simply says that we have a script we follow to set rates. We do something called cost of service, which we take your costs, put them into these different cost components, and these are the different cost components or cost buckets. There's costs that have to do with getting water, delivering water, conservation costs, peaking costs, just like an electrical system. There's cost to serve water when the system's flowing at its max capacity. There's meter maintenance costs, that's the cost to maintain and replace meters, and there's customer service costs. So we take all your costs, we take your budget, we do the best we can to put it into these different buckets, and then we allocate those costs to the different customer classes based on how they use water. And I should point out, you can see over on the right-hand side right here, this is what goes into your fixed charge. So it's very common to put your customer service costs, your meter maintenance costs, and your sum of your extra capacity costs into the fixed charge. Okay, so if you don't get a bill, we can't allocate some customer service costs to the fixed charge because customer service has to do with billing customers, answering their calls, and reading meters. Meter maintenance, of course, is maintaining meters. If you don't have a meter, we can't allocate, using this process, we can't allocate meter maintenance costs to that customer. And you'll see why I point that out in a second. So we do this analysis, and at the end of it, we know how much each customer class, their share of how much they need to pay. So if we need $10 million at the end of this exercise, we know single family owes $5 million, we know multifamily owes $3 million, we know commercial and business owes X million. That's the point of this exercise. So now let's talk about rates. These are your current rates. So on the left side, you have commercial and irrigation customers. You have a fixed monthly meter charge that goes up by meter size, and then they pay a volumetric rate of $4.48. And then on the right side, this is your residential and small business customers. Actually, I think it's just residential, single family, multifamily. They pay $37.62, depending on how many units they have. and then they pay a volumetric rate of $3.80. Okay? And our first recommendation, let me go through this first, just as a reminder. When we set rates, you can achieve different things. We call them pricing objectives. And we went through this exercise with the City Council 2 years ago. We talked about affordability, conservation, revenue stability, and these different boxes here, and we tried to get from City Council what's most important to you, and what we heard was affordability, conservation, and admin ease. So the rates that you're about to see are developed with this in mind. We're trying to promote affordability, and we're trying to promote conservation. So that's why we went to a 3-tiered rate, which we'll talk about in a second. So we're changing your rate structure, and we're removing the multi-unit residential charge. Remember that, I think it was $37.62, that is paid per dwelling unit. So multifamily, if you have a large multifamily complex in town, right now, the charge to that customer depends on how many units are in that apartment building, 50, 100, 4, what have you. And we're removing that charge. We're still going to collect the same amount of revenue, but we're removing that charge. And we're removing that charge because we feel as a firm that it follows best cost of service practices, and we feel it is more defensible in light of that methodology that I just showed you with the cost buckets, where we allocate cost to different customers. So, but looking back at your current rate structure, I think this made sense back then because, as you mentioned, you were coming off of recently metering all your customers. And when you meter your customers, when customers go from being unmetered to metered, they usually cut back water consumption because now they know, oh my God, I know how much I'm using and I know how much I'm going to pay, so they usually cut back. So to avoid a drastic drop in revenue, your consultant came up with this current rate structure to help promote revenue stability. But now you're metered. So this slide talks about 3 different things. We're going to be looking at customer bill impacts in a few slides. And there's 3 things that affect or explain the changes that you're going to see. The first one is we removed that multifamily charge by unit. Okay, and this is the reason why, because most, if not all of your multifamily customers, it's just the account owner that receives a bill. So they can only get the customer service cost that is associated with one bill.
What's the MFR stand for again?
Multifamily residential.
Okay.
And so each dwelling, I guess I should say it this way instead. Each multifamily unit does not get a bill. If you live in an apartment, you don't get a bill. The landlord gets a bill. So we can't assess customer service costs to a multifamily unit because they don't get a bill.
Is that the same for Surfside 4, where it's a condominium complex?
I wouldn't know. I don't know what Surfside is.
Well,
I would say yes, it is, because if it's a multi-unit,
One building with multiple units.
right,
yeah, so I would say yes.
okay.
Based. So same thing with meter service costs. Each multifamily unit does not have a meter, so we can't assess them meter maintenance costs. And then extra capacity, according to our methodology, is allocated in proportion to the meter size. So we're saying extra capacity is in proportion to the meter serving the property, because we're following that script I showed you earlier. So that explains, we'll be looking at multifamily in a second. You'll see that their bills are going down. This is the reason why, okay? The other reason is the fixed meter charge that you're about to see goes up by meter size. And before you were basing how that charge goes up, it was in proportion to the 5/8 inch meter. But your most numerous meter is a 3/4 inch meter. And that's how we normally escalate the higher meter sizes. We escalate it in proportion to the most common meter. So we're making a change there. We're saying the most common meter is a 3/4 inch meter, and that has a hydraulic capacity associated with it that is different from a 5/8 inch meter. So we're changing the fixed meter charge based on your most predominant meter. I know this is a lot of information, if you want me to restate it, but we're changing the scale of how we assess fixed meter charges. And it might be easier to understand when you'll see the numbers. And then lastly, we're changing the proportion of revenue collected from the fixed charge. Remember, we're going from 60 to 30. So this is good for single family. Their bills are going to go down because the fixed charge is going down. And you'll see that in a second. So we got a lot of different things going on here. We're implementing, right now you have a uniform rate. Remember the 380 that we looked at earlier? We're implementing, because you wanted to promote conservation, we're implementing a 3-tier rate. And tier 1 has a breakpoint of 8 HCF, and that is the minimum winter bi-monthly use. So this is an indoor use allocation. So what we're saying is most customers, most single-family customers in the winter, I guess that's bi-monthly, use 8 HCF bi-monthly. So it's an indoor water use allocation. Tier 2 is max summer use, so it stops at 14, and then Tier 3 is anything beyond 14. This is a very common way to set tiers in Southern California.
Can you define HCF?
100 cubic feet. I should have put that on the slide.
That's the unit of measurement.
Yes, so 100 cubic feet of water is 748 gallons, and the city bills in 100 cubic feet.
How many gallons again?
748.
Thank you.
So we have 3 tiers. And this here derives your fixed charge. So your current charge is right here. I'm looking at the smallest meter right now because it's your most predominant, actually the 3/4 inch. They're the same. So you see how your 5/8 right over here, your 5/8 and 3/4 inch meter, your current charge is $31. See that in the center of the circle there? So that is now, because you were lowering your fixed charge, that's going to go down to $24 and change. Okay, and how we come up with that $24 is it's the summation of 2 of those cost buckets that we saw earlier. It's $1.43 for customer service costs and $23 for meter service and extra capacity costs. So if anybody ever asks you, what am I paying for when I pay $24? You're paying $1.40 for our staff to bill you, and you're paying $23 for to maintain meters and extra capacity costs. And by the way, you may or may not know that the city has a CARE program. So if you qualify for the CARE program, these rates are discounted 7.5%. That's the same for the fixed charge and for the volumetric charge.
Low income, elderly.
These are your volumetric rates. So the most right-hand column is the total rate. Here I'm simply showing, because some clients really want to know how did you come up with that number. The number on the right is the summation of the supply rate, the delivery rate, the peaking rate, the conservation rate, and the offset rate. These are all unit rates. The supply is the cost to get and treat water. Delivery is the cost to deliver water. This is the unit cost to deliver water through your pipe system. Peaking costs are costs to deliver water when your system is flowing above average daily flow. And you have conservation costs for a small conservation program. It's only 10 cents per HCF. And then the offset is only used for the CARE program. So right in the middle of the slide there, you see where the offset is populated, negative 42, negative 43. Those are rate offsets that are derived from interest income to create that single-family residential CARE rate. We're instituting a private fire connection charge. This is the cost to have the capacity sitting there waiting outside of a private customer to extinguish fires if it need be. You currently don't charge for that. This is something that we discussed, went back and forth on it a little bit, but I think in the end we decided that the city would implement a private fire charge. For small connections, you can see it's very small, but for large connections, 10-inch, you can see it's $670 per month. It costs a lot to have a 10-inch standpipe and sitting there and have the capacity ready to serve a fire. 10-inch can flow a lot of water, and you got to have the capacity ready to fight a fire.
And again, I don't quite recall it that way. I thought we were a little conflicted with this because it was new. It is a pretty hefty charge. There's only 3 users with the 10-inch pipes?
It looks like there's one, number of customers,
One. That'd be
Yeah.
the port. Is it
Yeah.
one 10-inch pipe?
Yeah, one 10-inch
Yeah.
connecting.
They used to have
connection.
2. They turned it off because the water got so expensive, and now we're proposing another $673 a month. So that's going to be $7,000 or better a year. It's quite a hefty charge. And of course, restaurants and other businesses that have larger pipes. And this is pretty hefty expense. So we better understand exactly what this is because they're going to want to know. People are going to want to know.
So what's the driving force behind a 10-inch line at the port of Hueneme, if anyone knows? I mean, I just trying to understand where their need is for a 10-inch pipe.
The need over there is based on their customers' usage. They've got the hydro agri liquid fertilizer facility. They're bringing in concentrate, and then they're filling those great big tanks up with water. And so that's where that comes from. Now, perhaps they could load their tanks with the concentrate and then water it somewhere else where they might get a cheaper rate. That might be an idea to think about that, but I think they're making their blend right there at the port.
Keep in mind, if we did not charge this, you have a certain amount of revenue that's in that financial plan I showed you. If we don't charge this, I don't think this is a big amount of money, but whatever it is, let's say it's $10,000, $20,000 over a year. If we don't charge this, then that $20,000 now gets sprinkled into the costs for your other customers. So as we talked before, fire protection rates are actually very controversial. There is a line of reasoning that says that you should not charge private fire protection because these usually feed sprinkler systems or a port that's right outside of a building. It saves lives because if that wasn't there, they'd have to connect to a public fire hydrant. So that's the argument there, but the reverse argument, and I'm playing both sides of the coin here, is that there is a tangible cost that you can calculate that has to do with having a system that's ready to protect these customers. Because when a water engineer sizes a water system, they size it for something called average daily demand. So if everyone used the same amount of water every day at a certain rate, the system could be this big, the pipes could be this big. But the water engineer doesn't only design for average daily demand. He or she has to design for peak flows. So when everybody's taking a shower in the morning and watering their lawn in the summer, he or she's got to make the pipe bigger, the tanks bigger, the pumps bigger. And on top of that, the biggest one is fire flow. So a water system has to meet average daily flow. It's got to meet peak demand, and it's got to meet fire flow, because you could have a fire in the middle of summer at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when everyone's watering their lawn. So a water engineer designs a system for firefighting capacity. And if he or she did not, the system would be smaller. So it raises the question, should you rightfully, depending on which side of the fence you stand on, should you allocate those costs to those that are causing, who have the need for private fire protection? If you're on that side of the coin, then you would implement it, and if you're on the other side of the coin, you would argue and say we should not implement it. I would say that it is a little more common to implement a private fire connection charge based on my clients. We tend to recommend and implement more private fire charges than not. But ultimately, it is the city council's decision.
Is the Navy base included on here?
If it's in the data we were given, I would assume yes. If the Navy base is in the list of water customers we have, then yes. Do you supply water to the Navy base?
HWA does, yes.
Yeah, the Hueneme Water Agency does supply water to the Navy, yes.
What about the city?
The Hueneme Water Agency provides water for the city and both the bases and the port and Silver Strand.
I don't think the Navy base is considered our customer when we bill monthly.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Port, we bill monthly directly.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing with Channel Islands. They get a share of the water agency, but our billing and our operating system, which is here, isn't.
It's different.
They pay their wholesale water.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm curious though, who does the Navy then pay for their water?
Well, they pay the city, but they're paying Port Hueneme Water Agency, which gets all the
It's
wholesale
different.
bills and divides those up to the three entities.
Not to the city,
And
to
then
the
we
agency.
bill our so really, it's a retail rate we're talking here, and it's a wholesale rate that we're getting from PHWA and they're getting.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
PHWA is not the city, it is a joint powers authority, which is composed of the city. I mean,
different.
you're on the water board, you know this, but it's what, three entities, I think, what's Channel Islands Beach Community Services and the Navy and us. So that's, like Ken said, that's a retail rate that comes to us and then we're dispersing it out.
And that's where Akbar comes from. He's over there at the Channel Islands Beach Community District.
So, for clarification then for the group, is that most of our single-family, they're the largest group of water users would be the single-family, but they're sitting within the either 5/8 and 3/4 size pipe. And then the rest are distributed amongst business groups, right? Whether it's a shopping center or an individual business user, right? The
Yeah,
different pipe
So you
sizes.
actually only have one 3/4 inch meter, you see that number of customers? So you only have one fire protection customer that has a 3/4 inch meter. So I would say single family is not in here. But
okay.
your most common private fire customer, you have 24 4-inch connections. These are probably strip malls and things of that nature, I would guess.
So this fire connection would really only reflect on businesses. It wouldn't then reflect on single-family users.
That's correct. It's only applicable to those who have a private fire connection,
Okay,
which
thank
is
you.
Generally, when you see those things in the ceiling for fire protection,
Yeah.
those are dry, they're provided through this.
And therefore, when we talk about like a strip mall with several businesses, they all share that cost.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah,
it's not
so
as
that
bad as.
$60 a
Yeah.
month there would go to the landlord, and presumably he's charging all his tenants for
If he
this.
doesn't, he's crazy.
Same with the port, right? The
Yes,
port charges.
they're gonna have to charge their customers.
Yeah,
and-
Yeah.
so then this is just all our business,
Yeah,
business groups.
I should
Good.
have mentioned that.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank
Some
you.
things are just taken for granted in my head,
No,
and I don't
that's-
always
that's
state
okay.
them. Okay. Okay, so let's look at typical bills. So this is single-family residential, and what I have here is your current bill and your proposed bill as a result of the rates that you saw earlier. And then it's in proportion to, or in tandem with, how much a customer uses. So you can see I have, in the middle there, I have a mode. So your most common customer uses 5 HCF a month. And because we are lowering your fixed charge from 31 to 24, but we're increasing your volumetric rate, right, so that you collect the same amount of revenue, but your most common customer would actually see a bill decrease of $5.
Based upon their current usage.
Yes,
And if they reduce that, they're gonna save even more.
yes. And this is 58% of your customers. Looking all the way on the right-hand side there, you see percent of bills. So we're saying 58% of your customers use 5 HCF or less. Your average customer uses 6, so that would be a $3 decrease for your average customer. And of course, if you use more, you can see when you get out to the 12, 13, 14, then your higher volumetric rate starts to kick in and your bill goes up. And remember, coming back to those pricing objectives, the reason why we're doing this is because we heard we would like to promote affordability. This is affordability, and we'd like to promote conservation. This sends a signal: if you want to use more water, your bill's going to go up. Any questions there before I move on? This simply graphically shows you the numbers in the previous table. The orange is your current monthly bill, the blue is your proposed bill, and as you can see, if you're down on the low use end, you pay a little less. If you're up on the high use end, you pay a little more.
This is also assuming that we don't necessarily change that 30/70 each year. It just stays 30/70s flat out through,
Yeah,
right?
we wouldn't change that, yeah.
Because originally, when we talked about these rate changes back in 2009, we were coming off of all fixed, no matter what people were using, and it went to fixed and variable. But they changed over each year. They just adjusted a little every year. So just want to let you know that, this is a new story, a new future versus like what we've had in the past.
And that makes sense to me. Like I said, you went from metered to unmetered, so you didn't want to shock both your customers and then they use less and then your revenue goes down. So you've been working slowly towards a fixed and volumetric ratio that is palatable to you. And it looks like 30/70 is what I heard City Council wants to end up at.
But what the future lies, and we're not going to want to look this over every year to make adjustments, or
Right, you're correct.
No,
don't.
we
want to
said-
go, how long before we want to look at this again?
Well, we're setting 5-year rates because that's the max you can set.
Okay.
Yeah,
in
that's
Prop
what we said
218.
originally.
So every 5 years, we come back and look at this again?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that 00333 there, you can always implement revenue adjustments lower than that without having to do a Prop 218 hearing, but you can't go up. This simply shows that.
Where's the 00333? Where'd you get that?
It was the original year of the, he covered that like 20
So
slides
those are the
before.
revenue adjustments.
We're
In
looking at
slide,
No, it was a long time ago.
yeah, it was a long time ago.
Good, we're good.
Okay. This simply shows at the top graph here that about 70% of your customers will see either no change in their bill or a bill decrease. And then the bottom graph is care. It's roughly the same thing. This is single-family care. It's a lot like single-family regular. If you use 6, your bill will go down $3 for a 5% decrease. This is multifamily residential, and this one is, you can see I'm looking at the percent difference column and the monthly difference column. You can see they're kind of all over the place, and that's because it really depends on how many dwelling units they have. Because remember, the old rate structure, you were charging by the number of dwelling units. So I'm just looking at the second one up from the bottom. That one has 120 dwelling units. Whoever that customer is, there's 120 dwelling units. And so now but it's also a high water user. You see the monthly usage, 1,600. So they have a lot of units, but they're also a high water user. So in the end, it's a 3% change in that particular customer's bill. But if you have a customer with a high number of dwelling units, which is the one at the bottom, see the last one there. They have 200 dwelling units, but they're not as high of a water user. They only use 775. So their bill is going to go down quite a bit. You see that 46% at the bottom there for about $5,000 a month. I'm not sure what the
Wait, their bill's going down 46%?
Yes.
Based on their current usage. And
Because
if they
they're a
cut
really
down,
low user.
if they cut down, they'll save even more. It's an average number.
This assumes, this is just one particular customer. They have 1 meter, so it's probably a big meter, but they have 200 dwelling units. And so before, the way you're charging them now, you multiply 201 by that 3762. So they get a higher bill now, currently. So, but we're removing that charge based on all the logic that I went through with meter service, customer service, and all that stuff. And so now this results in a bill decrease for them because we're not charging by unit. We're charging them based on the size of their meter and how much water they use. So they have a 6-inch meter, so they're going to pay the fixed charge associated with a 6-inch meter, and then they're going to pay the volumetric rate associated with 775 HCF.
So that number of dwelling units, 201. So is each one of those units going to be metered?
No, they are not metered,
And they won't be in the future?
correct. That's-
But that one giant customer that distributes water to those 201, they are going to be subject to the volumetric charge?
Yes, because they are metered,
HOA.
yes.
So if they have neighbors that use a lot of water and then they use even more, the pipe breaks and everybody's gonna pay more for that, right? Within that unit.
If they use more water,
No, if, on the 201 units,
Uh-huh.
let's say, and 3 customers turn their water on and just leave it on, and then go on vacation,
they're gonna pay more.
everybody, all 201 units are gonna pay more.
Well, I wouldn't say it that way because they're paying for water through their rent. It's the landlord that you're charging this bill. The
The landlord
one
would not
bill.
be able to figure out who's doing it, though.
Right.
It's probably like an association or something
Yeah,
like
it's
Yeah.
an HOA.
Exactly.
Because they can't individually sub-meter what we do, so they get a round one, and then that gets distributed. So like I
Right.
said, it's
Yeah.
either built into the rent or
Exactly. So there is an area where it could be abused, but hopefully it won't be. Or it isn't already, because it can be abused right now.
Yeah.
Laura?
So my question relates to this change in transferring responsibility from a single user to, single-family user to a multifamily residential. Okay, let me start over. So the new building owners are going to be assuming this responsibility for billing their residents for water?
No. Most landlords I know do not bill their customers. It's just in their rent, usually.
Right, but this has to be implemented, right? This process has to be implemented for new landlords now, or not new landlords, for existing landlords. Are we implementing a change now where they're going to have to incorporate into their billing through the rent to their tenants?
No.
A new water rate?
No,
Or-
alls we're saying is we're changing the way, so the city has only billed landlords. We're simply saying that.
That's already in effect then?
Yes,
Okay.
correct. So
All
we're,
right.
we're simply saying we're changing the way the city is going to build landlords. Right now, what the city does, it says, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, how many units do you have in your apartment complex? Oh, you got 201. Well, you're gonna pay 201 times $37.62. This is your bill. That's what you're doing now. Now we're simply saying we no longer care about how many units you have. What we care about is what size, Mr. or Mrs. Landlord, what size is your meter and how much water do you use? That's how the city is
Okay.
gonna bill. So
All
it's a
right.
shift in how the city calculates bills.
Okay, I was just concerned that we were now asking building owners to implement a different procedure in their billing to their tenants.
No.
Okay, but that's already being done.
Yeah.
Okay,
billing is how we calculate the total bill.
I get that. Okay.
Steve?
So that 46% decrease, emphasis added, is going to go to that landlord who has 201 dwelling units, and that is a windfall for said landlord.
And they use less water.
Yeah.
This is based on their average consumption.
Right, so I just happened to choose, I probably chose an average consumption here, but if that account, you see they use 775, if that changes to say maybe it's the summer, maybe it's now double that, then their bill at that point in time would not be 46% lower. It would be less, but on average, it would be 46% less.
I get the averaging and all that, but when you get down to these type of reductions benefiting the landlord, I'm trying to square that in my mind.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I guess if it offers you any comfort, I discussed this with our CEO and our chairman of the board, whether or not we should implement this because it's a big deal. But again, we're relying on what I call cost of service principles, those buckets that I showed you. That's how we allocate cost to your customers, is based on do you have a meter, do you get a bill, and how do you use water. So we feel it's most defensible, and it is our recommendation. The city, you've been doing this for a long time, the city could choose to leave it as is if you wanted to. but in our opinion, it would not be following best rate setting practices. It would not be as defensible based on the cost of service allocation that I outlined earlier.
For-
Betting it's not a tenant situation, it's like a shopping center or something, HOA.
No, I'm pretty solid in my belief that it is the Surfside's, Surfside 4, Surfside 3, and so, that's benefiting an HOA, not necessarily a landlord, which probably is a good thing in the long run if we're achieving all our goals across the board, which you laid out initially. But it is a big number. I mean, anybody looking at a 46% decrease in a monthly bill, that's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And this is going to be for HOA, which means that it will reduce everybody's cost, or it will build up their reserves at the HOA to do other infrastructure projects that they may need, or coming due, planting new trees, new roofs, things like
One of the ways to look at this is that because they're proposing a shift to more equitable principles, is that maybe it wasn't entirely fair the way it was before. So we're not giving windfalls as much as we are correcting the way that we bill that maybe more equitably distributes the cost.
Right. Everything I've described, if it helps at all, is laid out in something called the M1 manual put out by the American Water Works Association. Their M1 manual is the rate setting manual, and we are following this textbook.
I understand the methodology and everything makes sense up until this 46% number. So again, how did your CEO square that with you?
Well, basically, I said, is there a basis for charging a per dwelling unit charge according to cost of service principles? And he said he's seen it, and he scratched the ground, and he said, no. At the end of it, he said no. And then I asked our executive vice president, and he said the same thing. So it was my opinion, and it was their opinion as well. I would feel comfortable if it ever got to this, and I don't think it would, but if I had to defend this in court, I could explain how we came up with it.
The 46%.
Just the rate setting methodology, why multifamily is, why they're going down. I could lay out the basis following cost of service principles. And I've got support from our CEO and my vice president. When he encounters it, he's also making the same recommendation, because I don't know if you know this, but the city of San Juan Capistrano got sued over their water rates. And since then, there's been a windfall of lawsuits. So water rates are being scrutinized heavily. So there's a lot of caution and conservatism based in this recommendation. I'm not going to stand here in front of you and say you have to do this, because
But you are saying this would pass muster.
we believe it
Yeah.
would pass muster.
Because of the methodology where San Juan Capistrano got in trouble is that they just went ahead and made those changes versus like having this methodology that said, we're not going to charge different people different, but only if their pipe is a different diameter. And I think with that other city, there wasn't anything that kind of set that tone.
Yes, so San Juan Capistrano had tiered rates like you have, and tier 2 was a perfect 1.5 multiple of tier 1. And when the judge said, how did you get that 1.5, they didn't have an answer.
So let me try this. So
I don't know if I'm going to be able to
I know,
assuage
but-
your concern.
no, it's trying to square this mathematically, and I understand the methodology is pure. It's
It's clean.
clean, makes sense. So on the second item on this slide, you have number of meters, 45, number of dwelling units, 6. Okay? So I think I know what that is. However, they're looking at a 36% increase. So if you can contrast number of meters, second from the bottom, 40, so we got two line items here with the same amount of meters, but their costs are going the opposite direction dramatically.
Yep, and that's why I had that big explanation in the couple of slides ago. It depends on, here what you have, so it says number of meters, so you have 45 customers that have 6 dwelling units in their apartment complex that have a 2-inch meter. And apparently the average use for them is 163 HCF.
Can you say that again? You have,
So you have
40
45, in your database, you have 45 customers that have a 2-inch meter, okay, and it's an apartment complex with 6 dwelling units in it. You with me?
yeah.
And on average, they use, these are averages here, so you shouldn't assume that all 45 of these customers are gonna see a 36% increase. I'm saying the average use for those 45 customers is 163, and there's a couple things going on. One, their water use is fairly high, and that 2-inch charge, remember we're changing the fixed charge, I bet you the 2-inch charge is going up. Let's go back a few slides. So we want a 2-inch meter. If there's a faster way to move around, let me know. Okay. So right now, we're saying a 2-inch meter. Oh, okay. So the 2-inch meter is going down. It's because your volumetric rate is going up. So they're high water users. So your volumetric rate, this is multifamily, right? It's 584, and right now it's 380. So they're using quite a bit of water as a customer, and that higher volumetric charge is kicking in and causing the bill to go up. Because right now they're paying $3.80 per HCF, right? And what we're saying here is multifamily residential would now pay $6.31. So that fixed charge, if you don't use much water, that fixed charge is going down, then it's a discount for, if there's multifamily users out there that don't use water, then their rate is gonna go down. But if they're irrigating their lawn or maybe taking long showers, I don't know what, but if they start to use a lot of water, then that volumetric rate is gonna kick in and their bill is gonna go up, and that's what you're seeing in that line item that we were looking at.
One more question on that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're going to be able to answer it. If we go back to the slide that started all this talk between, here we go. So if the second line on this is, say, a low-income apartment, so let's say the dwellings are 6 low-income apartment buildings.
That wouldn't be reflected in here because there's multifamily residential care, so their bill would be their rates would be a 7.5% discount.
Okay,
Compared to
I'm just
this.
trying to isolate the group that's going to look at a 36% increase versus a group that's going to look at a 46% decrease. I'm just trying to isolate those two groups and understand who they are.
Okay.
Just, again, your methodology makes a lot of sense, but it's not going to make sense to the person with a 36% increase.
The old rate wasn't impacted as much by how much they used as the new rate would be more impacted by how much they used or saved.
It's because of the 30/70.
By default, somebody gets a 48% decrease, the other class members are gonna get a 46% increase, because we're talking the same amount of revenue, just how we divide it out.
Right, because remember, you're charging $37.62 per dwelling unit right now. So that matters a lot when you have a lot of dwelling units. But these guys at the top of the table, they only have a few dwelling units. So the differences between the old bill and the new bill are less pronounced. Right, because you're, at the bottom there, you were taking 201 times 37.62, which creates a high fixed charge. But you only have 6 units in that second line there, and you have a higher volumetric weight. So the discount from the former does not outweigh the higher volumetric rate. So now you're being charged $631 per unit, and they're a high water user per account. 163
It's pretty high.
is pretty high for a 2-inch meter.
I don't know, how many are units?
I don't know. Like, you could have 2 apartment complexes, whether condos or apartments, exactly the same, they have the 2-inch meter, one has a pool and one doesn't. They're probably paying close to the same rate in the old rate structure, whereas in the new rate structure, because that pool will require so much more water, they'll pay a lot more.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a ramification of lowering your fixed charge. So you have an old rate system that you could say charges everyone equally, that depends less on how much water they use. And now you're implementing a rate structure that charges more based on how much water they use. So high water users' bills are going to go up.
And that one big user at the bottom was paying $10,000, almost $11,000 a month.
Yeah, because of the old calculation. So, I don't know. I hear you. It's like, why, But
It's a situation where the winners are going to sing praises, and then the big losers are going to be at that mic telling us what time it is. And
Yes.
so, again, I'm
Very-
trying to understand
No,
who
I
these
mean,
groups are
that's-
like.
yeah.
I mean, because knowing ahead of time, might affect the way we market the new program.
yeah.
You know,
Well,
I
the-
think if I can,
If I may, it's important that you not look at specifics of who they are, because then your views of who they are can affect the way you want to set their rate. It's better to look at it as an overall system and set methodology so that you don't get yourself into lawsuit areas where, we say, well, we're not going to make it that tough on those people because for whatever reason. That's not a methodology-based, equity-based way to do it. It's a political way to do it, and it's dangerous. So I would just recommend that you focus on, this is a startling, I don't think I've ever seen this much differential, but I think what that speaks to is the way we were doing it before, which wasn't fair, and now we're correcting it, and it should have been corrected before, and you guys now are asking to take the heat for a bunch of stuff that should have been done before.
And I believe for many years, it was the residents
Yeah.
that was paying the bill for
Yeah.
all the commercial businesses. They were paying more than anybody, and they were the main support.
Properly designed system, you'll see changes like that percentage-wise, kind of equally distributed across all classes.
Yeah.
Single-family
Yeah.
business. But when you have a poorly designed structure, you're gonna have these shifts
Yeah.
because you're now accounting for stuff you didn't account for.
Sylvia?
Yeah, so if I may, I hear Councilmember Gama's concerns, and that is where, there could be a savings, but is it really going to be passed down to then the person who pays the bill versus the landlord pays the bill, but then they have to pass it on, to the customer, to their own customer. So I hear that, you're saying maybe there's a concern there, and certainly those things happen. But I believe when we looked at it last time with a different council up here, it was really to help then balance out where perhaps the residential had taken the brunt of some of these and stabilized it a little more, and there was going to be costs associated to having a business in Port Hueneme. I know I had a concern about it, but the majority of the council voted to do this and make these kinds of changes. But certainly it is where it's going to affect one more than another, because I think we're just trying to get to another kind of balance, a 30-70, and taking away some of those other revenue amounts that had hit most of our people.
Anyway, the protest won't get really mean and ugly until you're mayor. It'll be 2 years.
No, not really. It hits us all evenly.
So if I could,
Not anymore.
in 1998, I purchased a home and my water bill was $189 every 2 months for as long as I can remember.
It was an all-you-can-eat plan.
Yeah, and
You want to complain to yourself now?
no. I want to, I paid my water bill this morning.
Yeah?
So 1998, $189 every 2 months. And today I paid my bill and it was $222.
How much do you use?
I wish I knew right off the bat, but,
Do a lot of gardening,
A
Steve.
lot.
but my point is that that's pretty reasonable over a 20-plus year period of time. So,
You're one of these.
and then, and then the other question I have, because I do pay attention to my water bill and water usage, and sometimes it doesn't make sense. Like the month I shut off my sprinklers for the winter, my bill went up. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. So, and this isn't anything you could address, but for our city manager and others, it's like, do we have reliable meters? Because oftentimes I try to look at my bill and feel confident in it, and it doesn't quite make sense sometimes. So, and I don't know where that leads, but just leave it at that.
Yeah, I guess to summarize in one sentence is before, right now, to calculate a bill, all we care about is what size is your meter, what size is your master meter, and how much water do you use. That's all we care about in this rate structure. Before, you cared about not only how much water you use, but how many dwelling units are in the apartment complex. So that's the main difference there.
So if they went out and bought a new meter, smaller size, they could
They would get a lower fixed charge, yeah.
get a we won't give them a permit for that, right?
You mean you want to divide out one of those?
If it helps any, and I can't predict the future, but typically who comes to Prop 218 hearings is single family. That doesn't mean you won't get a multifamily owner here, but I'm just saying from experience, I see a lot of single family.
Can you go back to or maybe this is the slide, the one that shows the bottom, yeah, that bottom number.
Well, this is commercial. Let me go back to multifamily. Yep.
So, the bottom number here, that the 201 dwelling units, the number of meter one, that landlord's getting that one, right? That savings is based on because we had this service charge per group, right? So that's all it is once we remove that, then that's the savings versus like anything else. There could be other savings depending on if they change their volume usage, but right now it's just because we removed that revenue pot,
Yes.
that strain.
Yes, so a cost of service way of looking at it, you remember those buckets that I showed you? There was one that said extra capacity. Your old rate structure allocated some extra capacity costs to each dwelling unit. But what we're saying is that capacity cost is in proportion to your meter size, because your meter size says how much you can flow. Just having a dwelling unit, you don't know, do 10 people live in there, do one, you don't know how much capacity is gonna be they're gonna take in that dwelling unit. We're basing everything based on the meter size. And the fixed charge goes up based on the capacity of the meter. I didn't explain that. I should explain that going back to the fixed charge. We're allocating costs. Okay, yeah, I should have explained this. But you see, you've got your different meter sizes here. And each one of those different meter sizes has what the AWWA calls a safe operating flow that can go through that meter. So a 2-inch meter can flow safely 160 times the amount of water through it compared to a 3/4 inch meter, the capacity, okay? So when you go over here to meter service, you'll find that the 2-inch charge, that 122 right there, it is 160 times that of a 3/4 inch meter. That's the logic. It's all based on the potential safe flow through a meter. And that's the story that we would have if we ever had to go to court. But if somebody says, well, you know, what is that story for multifamily? That's where we as a firm, we're like, well, what are you going to say? You know, how did you come up with the 3762? You have to have a logic, or otherwise you're going to end up like San Juan Capistrano.
We came up by meter size.
The fixed charges go up by meter size,
That's our
which
answer.
is how we're allocating extra capacity, that bucket from the cost of service slide.
And volume use is the other factor. So if they're high uses, then they're gonna be higher.
Yes, their bill will be higher, yes.
Meter size and volume, that's our story, we're sticking to it.
Meter size and volume.
34, keep going.
Commercial, right? We were on commercial, which also has a bit of a, commercial goes up quite a bit. And last time I was here, city council was keying in here on the port, which is this customer right here.
Yeah.
10-inch customer who uses a lot of water, as you can see here, compared to the other.
I
customers.
was really concerned about our businesses, you know, with these kinds of numbers and the effect of these numbers on
Restaurants,
them.
laundromats,
You name it.
you know, cleaners.
But do they pay, the port charges them rent, right? So they don't directly pay, I'm asking here, I guess, they don't directly pay water bills, right? I'm assuming they pay the owner of
The
this
customers of the port?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a little different formula, they don't pay rents, it's built on something else.
Oh.
But
Okay.
that fertilizer company is probably the 90% of all the water usage out there.
I wouldn't say 90, but it's a lot.
A
It's a
lot,
big one, and
right.
they'll have to make a meter for them, right?
They'll have to pass that cost along, which makes me feel comfortable because they're delivering a consecrated fertilizer and then they're adding volume to it with water.
With a local asset.
Yeah.
so here, we're developing rates, we've also developed rates based on how each customer class uses water. And your commercial class actually peaks more, and by that I mean their yearly water use goes up and down more than single family. This is not very common. I think it just shows that your single-family users here I see a lot of small lots, so you don't get a huge summer swing in watering. But for some reason, I don't know if it's the port, but as a class, your commercial customers have a high variation, i.e. peaking, in their water use. Therefore, their volumetric rate reflects that. Because remember peaking I was talking about earlier, you have to size a system based on how your water users use the system. So for some reason, your commercial class, usually when I do rate studies, your commercial class has a low peaking factor because a Taco Bell or a bank, they use the same amount of water all year long. But you've got, I don't know if it's one customer or several customers that have peaks or variation in water use. So that's factored into the rate. That's one thing contributing to the increase in water rates here. in
Now
their
that I
bill.
couldn't tell you what that is, but I'll find out. Interesting question to ask them. Why, if they see that happening.
Yeah. Are there more ships in a certain period than other times, you know, and
I see the fertilizer ship come about, it seems like every 2.5 months. That might,
And I think it's more frequent.
yeah.
It's almost every month, every month.
So I think this is the last of the customer classes. We've got city property, irrigation, and city irrigation. It looks like, again, it depends on your meter size and how much
No.
water you use. Customers
with
that are using more
irrigation.
water, their bills are going up. Customers that are using less water, for instance, I'm looking at like 13, that's going down. The 3/4 inch city property is going up even though they're not using a lot of water. That must be because of the fixed charge. It's going up $4. But this varies based on the size of your meter and how much water you use. So it looks like this particular irrigation meter here uses more than the others, and it's gonna go up. This is the city.
Drip irrigation, that's the answer. Drip, drip.
So that concludes the formal presentation. at this point, I might turn it over to staff, or I'll just ask the question, we can, I don't know if you want to make a decision or give staff guidance on whether or not to move forward with the property, or if you could ask for another scenario. You could say, you could ask to see something else if you wanted. There's a little bit of budget for that. But to sum up, we have 2 years of 0% revenue adjustments followed by 3, 3, and 3. What I showed you is just the first year's bill impacts. Right, we're making all these big changes, so you saw a bunch of changes. But in the following years, everybody's bill is going to be affected 3% because we're not making these changes again. So in a year where we're adjusting your revenue 3%, then it just means everybody's bill is going up 3%. So you're not going to see this every year. It's just for this 1 year of changes.
Mayor Berg, would you like me to give kind of a recap on some things?
Yes, please.
All right. Good afternoon, City Council. Mayor Berg, I'm going to give you a brief recap of the system and some key things. This was the synopsis of the executive summary, and I highlighted some points out there. On the 4th page in of the executive summary, it just gives the scope of the water master plan, and it was done to really to analyze the system and come up with what needed to be done. And then I want to go into a little background on the existing system. The existing system you'll find on the 9th page of this. The pages are not numbered, but if you count, you'll find, and it's highlighted. Just to give you an overview of our existing system. The City of Port Hueneme domestic water system consists of the following. A little over 47 miles of pipe ranging in size from 2 inches to 14 inches in diameter. There are 2 12-inch potable water supply connections to the 24-inch diameter Port Hueneme Water Agency transmission main. We have 1 closed pressure zone. Basically, what that means is we don't have pressure zones. Like the City of Ventura has different elevations. City of Santa Paula has different, and they have booster pumps and water tanks. We're a flat area in a small city, so we have 1 pressure zone. That's what that means. We have 2 standby wells and 1 inactive well. All right, we have an emergency well on the north side, and we have an emergency well over by Bubbling Springs. I'm going to be coming back to council in June because the Fox Canyon Water Management Agency is pressuring us to decide whether we're going to keep these wells or we're going to abandon them. And it's a value, I think it's a valuable asset. I have not, with Mr. Hickok's gone, I have not had the time to do the research and everything. But these wells were circa 1970, and what they do is they are our emergency backup. We have a chlorinator at the wellhead, and I'm going to be presenting to council in June a contract to a consultant to analyze these wells, to give me a cost to TV these wells, and to see what cost to rehabilitate them. I'm guesstimating it's going to be about $500,000 per well. But what this is this is our emergency connection. It is not a matter of when, if we're going to have an earthquake, it's a matter of when we're going to have an earthquake. And as I said, we're supplied 80% by United and 20% by Cayugas. There will be breaks in those supply lines, without a doubt. But we have a well on the north side and we have a well by Bubbling Springs. So yes, there's going to be breaks in our lines, but these wells represent a water source that we can hook in to directly into our water supply system, while the other supplies, yes.
If you were to pull water from those wells, is there a cost to any agency other than the electrical cost or whatever the cost to pull the water from the well?
Those can only be used in an emergency condition. We cannot use them. We, in order to prevent seawater intrusion, the City of Oxnard, the Navy base, and the City of Port Hueneme stopped pumping from our wells and transferred our allocation, or our pumping rights, if you will, and they're held in trust. We did not give them to United Water, but they're pumping on our behalf from the wells that are in the in the Saticoy area, because they're not drawing down the way our wells did, and allowing seawater intrusion. So the two wells we have can only be used for emergency conditions. And we run them once a month to test them. We're required, and we have to sample them. But I just wanted to give you what those two standby wells are. That's a valuable asset to the city of Port Hueneme. All right, we have approximately 4 emergency connections. We have approximately 393 fire hydrants. And on the next page, we have a little over 5,600 potable water services. So that gives you a quick overview of what our water system is, all right? And as far as, and now on page 10, the transmission and distribution system. The potable water system includes almost 250,000 feet, that's 47 miles, of transmission and distribution pipes. And again, they were giving the size range from 2 to 14. Now, approximately 2% of these are 4-inch lines, let's see, approximately 2% are 4-inch, let's see, 52% are 6, 26 are 8, 9% are 10, and it gives you a percentage of size line. Approximately 26% were installed in the 60s, 30% were installed before the 1960s, 30% in the 60s, and 22% in the 70s. Okay, our emergency connections. Okay, we have an emergency connection to between the 24-inch PHWA line and the 24-inch United line. Now, okay, if you've not got an opportunity to go to our water treatment plant, let me know sometime, and we can conduct a tour for the new council members. We'd be glad to do that. Okay, over there on Perkins Road, that's where the Port Hueneme Water Authority treatment plant is. We have a PHWA asset. It was put in approximately in 1996, and it's running on Pleasant Valley Road. And right where it crosses Ventura Road, we have an emergency connection to the old 24-inch United water line. Before there was a PHWA, United serviced the base and the city, and that's the old line. And we have an emergency connection to that, and so does the base. So that's what that emergency connection is talking about. And then we have another emergency connection up at Oxnard at Victoria and Channel Islands, and that's tied into the city of Oxnard, all right? And the Channel Islands Beach District has a tie into that, and the Navy base has a tie-in. There's 3 separate valves, one for the Navy, one for the Channel Islands Beach District, and one for the city. And there's some issues with that anyway that I'm working out with Akbar. But note the last line there. It says the interconnection should not be relied on as a primary source, but only in emergencies. Okay. But Oxnard is going to have water line breaks in an emergency. All right. And then next, right below that, is talking again about the standby wells. If you go to page 14, in here, we talked about issues with fire flow. The north side of the city has a fire flow problem. And I've highlighted, what you're seeing in here in this recap are highlights that I did for you. And this was presented in one of the previous workshops and about a year and a half ago. And some of this information I provided when we did the one-on-one to the individual council members. I gave a brief overview of this. But it says that the existing system is incapable of providing the maximum demands plus fire flow to the northwesterly part of the city. And right below that, it says a 24-inch pipe is recommended to replace the existing 14-inch pipe in Ventura Road. That's the number one priority in the water master plan, in the capital project plan. And for that, I've looked at this water master plan. It's a good plan, prepared by a good set of engineers. But they didn't do value engineering, and tried to look at, and I said this before to council, is digging up Ventura Road would be logistically a big headache, a nightmare. So I looked for a different way to do this. And what we have is that 24-inch PHWA asset that crosses the base. We have a line that crosses the base, put in 1996. And what I'm looking at is, can I tie into that line on the west side of the base, run it on the east side of Victoria, and provide that redundant water supply to the north side? it's going to save approximately $2 million in cost because I'm not digging up Ventura Road. There's still a section of pipe in Ventura Road I'll have to address, but I won't have to go the whole length of Ventura Road. And it provides, it's a win-win. The Beach District likes it, the Navy base likes it, and it provides a better loop system, and it provides fire flow to the north side. So that's what, and I'm going to, go ahead. So,
You know, when Robert Nordahl was part of PHWA, we did a tour out there with some of the facilities. I think it was when we were looking at their desalination kind of stuff that they had going on with some other customers. And he showed me that particular spot over at the corner of Victoria and Channel Islands Boulevard. And they were really interested in kind of bringing it up to date too. So I believe this might be really a good story for both of us to look into that. I think they could be really set for, you know, let's take on a project that they would really enjoy.
I've done some preliminary discussions with the Navy and with the Beach District, and they conceptually have bought into it. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be coming back to the council in June, and one of the things I'm going to be doing is I currently have a request for a proposal out with an engineering company to do a hydraulic study on that line to see what it's going to take if we have the capacity in there. And I'm 80% sure that we have the capacity. We may have to boost the pressure there, but then have pressure reducers so we don't affect our system. But we can push water through that line, enough water so that we can supply it to the north side. But I'm going to be coming to council to request authorization to enter into a contract to do that. To have that. So we're starting on the water master plan, and this is addressing the most high priority is that 14-inch ductile iron pipe, which is 70 years old in Ventura Road. So, but we have a fire flow issue that's identified. I pointed out there. And then on page 15, the transmission and distribution system, I highlighted that. And it says the critical point in the city system is on Ventura Road between Sunkist and Channel Islands, where the existing 14-inch ductile iron pipe is the only facility that conveys water to the north portion of the city. And that's the Achilles heel for our water system right now. And that's a 70-year-old line.
Are you saying that that's unavoidable? We're going to have to work on that one? Or will the base?
Redundancy.
Well, the base, well, no, it's going to be that ductile iron pipe. We're going to leave it in the ground. We're not going to pull it out. But we're going to put another line.
Another one.
Next to it, or-
Redundant.
No, on the back. We have a line that already crosses the base.
Yeah.
A big line. Okay, and that services the Beach District and the base. But what I want to do is push more water through that line. It has the ability to do it, and then tap into it and run it up for the city at the north side. So we have a second line that's providing service to the north side of the city. Right now, it's only this 14-inch line in Ventura Road. So I'm going to bring in another line from the northwest end of the city. So if we had a break off that line, I can backfeed it from the other side. I can do that. That's the plan. And so
How old is that line that cuts across the base?
1996.
Nice.
So that is just a brief synopsis, Mayor Berg. I hope, are there questions?
So you're coming back with a request for us to approve a contract? And so you have an estimate on the price
No.
for this particular project?
No, it's not for the project itself. It's for a consultant to do
The design?
first to do a capacity study on the line that crosses the base.
I see.
As I said, I'm 80% sure that we have the ability to use that line. Basically, we'd be increasing the pressure, pushing more water through that line. It can handle the pressure, and then where we connect on Ventura Road, we put a pressure reducer so we don't impact our lines, and then we're pushing more water across the base. Channel Islands Beach District will have to have a pressure reducer there, but they'll get the benefit of having increased pressure if they want it, depending on how good their system is, if their system can handle the increase in pressure, and also the base. So it's a win-win situation.
Is this project pre-identified under the CIP?
No, it's not. This was something that I looked at. We have to address the 14-inch line that goes up Ventura Road. And they addressed it by just replacing that line. I was looking at the logistical nightmare of tearing up Ventura Road. It's the major access to the base, it's the major access to the port, logistically, closing lanes, it's a nightmare. So I was looking for, how can I come up with something different that may make it easier to do? And so after looking at all our plans, I said, you know what, this may be a way to do it. And I've kicked it around with several other engineers, the Beach District and the Navy. They all think it is doable. But I have to confirm that, and that's what I'm going to be coming back to council with in June, a request to authorize a contract with a consultant to do that study. And if that goes well, probably the latter part of the summer, we would probably execute a contract with a consultant to design that. And then, go ahead, Councilman.
It was a different question, but finish that thought. I have, on the wells that you were
Okay.
talking about
Oh, I
earlier.
have a question still to follow up with him.
Okay.
On
So
this topic, if that's okay.
I have been talking to Amanda Fagan. You know, we may need some, a little bit of political help to get access on the base. Getting contractors on the base and things like that. We may need some help there, but it's a win-win situation. The Navy base realizes it's a win-win for them because it gives them a redundant thing, a redundant service connection also. That is, working through the Navy bureaucracy is probably going to be one of the key items that we're going to have to address here. But I've been talking to the Navy personnel, and they're willing to help us, but we may end up, that may be the critical path item.
Thank you. Lauren?
Yeah, thank you. The reason I was asking this question is because it seems like an ideal project for a hazard mitigation grant under state OES and FEMA. It's a 75% share. We would pick up the 25. Our design costs would be eligible under that. We should keep our eye out for the applicant, the application opening, which might be coming up maybe beginning of the new year. So, I mean, this is not in any way intended to hold you up from pursuing the contract and getting the design, but it may be on the construction side, the actual construction side, when you begin to break ground, this money might come in handy if we can get qualified for that kind of grant, because it's a perfect candidate. It's an emergency water backup, earthquake retrofit project. It's regional. It affects 3 different regions in our area. So I think it'd be a good candidate for that
Rich?
hazard mitigation grant.
I knew you were talking about it a while back with the wells, but as the questions went on, I wanted to let that flow go on. The two wells that you're considering doing an analysis on, do earthquakes, maybe a stupid question, do earthquakes affect those wells as far as the ability to use them?
They could. We've got a casing down there. We're going to TV, part of the analysis would be to TV the casing. And yes, it's always possible, depending on with the location of the earthquake and the magnitude of the earthquake, that the casing could have some damage to it. But it's much more likely that we're going to have multitude of water line breaks in our supply lines coming from United and Cayugas, because I'm sure we're going to have multiple breaks in those lines. And these 2 wells are close to, we'll have breaks in ours, no question about that, but we'll be able to hopefully rapidly fix those sufficiently where we, if needed be, tie in our system to these 2 wells.
Yeah, of course, we're at the end of the pipe.
And then the second question is, how long, as a backup, how long would those wells be able to service the city of Port Hueneme?
There's a couple of issues there. There's requirements with the state. We could probably only operate them for a couple of weeks, hopefully, and then we have to also, as part of the retrofit, put some chlorinators. The chlorinators have to be upgraded at the wellheads, and as I said, I'm guesstimating that they're going to be about $500,000 per well, but that's a valuable asset. And there again, Councilwoman Hernandez, is that they too may be eligible for a FEMA disaster, some sort of funding also, because they're an emergency backup for us, so.
Absolutely, we should definitely keep that in mind.
Steve?
So, I just learned something. Councilmember Hernandez just made us aware of a grant, and I want to make sure that we don't forget about it. I want to understand how we could agendize that or make it a priority for our city manager to pursue that grant. It seems to be something that we need to pursue 100%. So just want to make sure we don't lose sight of that. And I appreciate all the work you've done. I think it's great. It's a great plan. And now if we could just find a way to pay for it with someone else's money. It's our money, but, I just want to recognize the fact that, hey, we just learned something, and I want to make sure that we follow up on it, because it could be very, very beneficial to the city. Thank you.
Yes. Don, I have a question. With working with the base on building that redundant supply pipe, it still leaves the pipe along Channel Islands Boulevard, Ventura Road, that will ultimately need some replacement. And yes, no, or?
Yes, a portion of it will be, but what the Water Master Plan called for was replacing the whole thing.
Right.
So
that's what I recall.
No, we won't have to replace the whole thing. And then even when we're working on it, if I have this other line in first, their priority was addressing fire flow, and this line is 40. So if I put this other line in from the west, then if we're working on the other line, I'll have a redundancy if we have to shut that down for a short period of time too. We'd have to do some jumpers to make sure other people have water, but it would definitely be a plus. Yes, we're going to have to dig up part of it, but another thing I've discovered working with Fred Camarillo, a number of years ago we had a force main on Ventura Road, a sewer force main. I don't know if you knew that, but it's no longer being used. And we can use that possibly, we could sleeve that, run another water line in there and sleeve it to further reduce the amount of digging up that we're going to have to do on Ventura Road. I haven't fully, vetted the idea. We were just kicking it around because, again, this was a great water master plan and it was done by a very good firm, but they didn't look at all these other things. They didn't look at value engineering. They didn't look at, other facilities that might be used. They didn't try to get creative to try and look at other solutions. So I can't promise that we could use that old force main that is no longer in use as a sleeve, but we may be able to do that. And that's something also that I would probably task a consultant to do, because what we do is they'd have to research the as-built for that old line. They'd have to TV it to see if we can sleeve it. And so, but it's an asset that we may be able to use to minimize work on Ventura Road. And whenever we do that, in the long run, we're going to save money.
Excellent. Any other questions? Okay. I do have a question. Are there some decisions you would like us to make today?
Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
How are we meeting the rate study? I didn't talk to staff about this, but one step is you could direct staff to, if you like what you saw, to proceed with the public notice. Or you could sit on it, think about it. There is one more meeting in the budget, but if you don't ask for another scenario, I would come back and present
Okay,
it.
so what you're asking us to do is discuss and make a decision on the 30-70 split. Is that it?
No, the whole so I
The whole-
presented to you today, I guess to summarize, I presented to you revenue adjustments.
Is there a slide that summarizes everything you want us to vote on?
No, but I will. So what I presented to you today were revenue adjustments to the water enterprise as follows. Oops, there it is. Okay, so we are proposing, we are proposing that for the next 2 years, you would not adjust your revenue. Fiscal year 2020, 0% revenue increase. Fiscal year 2021, 0% revenue increase, followed by 3 years of 3% revenue adjustments.
Okay, let me ask the obvious question. Why don't we want to adjust in 19 and 20? Is it too late? Then wouldn't have to be 333. It could be 2.75 maybe, or
Right.
a little bit less. Would you
Right,
guys want
so
to
to
consider
answer your
something like
first
that?
It would
question,
look- it
why
would
0,
have a less
0?
impact.
So
Yeah.
he's answering why 0, 0.
Because this, part of the reason why I'm here today is to give the people who were not part of the rate study an update on where we left off. And where we left off is we had a city council that was very much in favor of minimizing bills for customers and enjoyed seeing 0% revenue adjustments for 2 years. So I'm simply picking up where we left off. But you don't have to do 0, 0. You could make it 3% across the board. But I also showed you your reserve balances as a result of these revenue adjustments, and you saw that you were okay. You were going down, but you were okay. So if you like what you see, you could say, please proceed with the public hearing notice, and we would proceed with the rates that you saw today. That's one option.
Stop there.
Yeah.
How about if we go one at a time?
Okay.
Can we do that? What do you guys think of that?
What do you mean by one at a time?
So looking at this revenue adjustments?
Thinking about this revenue adjustment, 0, 0, no changes for 20 and 21, but then 22, 23, 24, we increased 3%.
So I have a question. What happens if during that 2-year period, something occurs, an anomaly of some sort, and we need to change our rates?
You would have to go through another Prop 218 hearing process.
So I know that when we ultimately hit this 0, 0, and 3% for the next 3, we looked at different variables. We looked at, should we increase it the first year? Should we scale up and go 1% or 1.5 and then get to 3? And I think finally, after all this modeling you did, real time with us, that everybody then felt comfortable with this. So we did kind of take a look at other scenarios. Doesn't mean we have to stay there, but that was kind of where we ended
So-
up with
So
Yeah,
these
if-
numbers.
if we did every year, it'd be like 1.8% every year.
Yeah.
You mean as?
1.9?
Yeah.
What I did is I took 9 divided by 5.
Yeah, 1.8, yeah.
How about 2% a year?
That just kind of evens everything out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do 2% every year. And this is why I was mentioning earlier that I don't see this often, because customers don't remember. 3 years from now, they're not going to remember, hey, we didn't increase rates for 2 years in a row.
Yeah, you're
And
right.
if you have to, all of a sudden, something happens and you have to go from 3 to 7, they don't remember that the rates weren't touched for 2 years. So this is uncommon. So
Right.
Or make it 1.9.
Yeah,
And
my
if somebody
concern
sees
is
that-
come FY 2022, when we're preparing the budget for that year, and we're going to increase to 3%, that's going to cause some attention to.
But if we're, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
yeah, the
I
reason,
like
would,
the
be,
idea.
I would be okay with just changing it, the model, to say 1.9% every year for 5 years.
So 1.9 or 1.8?
Well,
Whatever-
1.8 if I
whatever it works
divide
out to be.
6, but if
Into
you,
5.
technically though, if you take 3% and then the following year add 3%, that's a little bit more than actually the first 3%.
Right.
Because it's
Compounds.
incremental. So 1.9%, 1
Sounds better than 2%.
yeah, it sounds better than 2%.
1.99.
Yeah, 1.9.
yeah, so.
Charlie, do you have something you wanted to say?
So we could do that, and your reserve balances would end up roughly in the same area, okay?
Yeah.
So you would,
Yeah.
but all the bill impacts that I showed you,
Yeah.
remember there was
Those are the
minus $5, so it wouldn't be minus 5. It would still, chances are it would still be lower. I mean, you would still have a bill decrease, but instead of minus $5, it might be like minus $3 or something. So your bill impacts will be affected if we put 1.9 in that first year.
Yeah.
I don't hear the council being too concerned about those little increases. It's the giant increases. And I think the problem with you have a lot of things in your model, and I remember from your prior presentations before this council came to office that every time that one of the council members would ask, well, we could change that, then the whole model changes
Yeah.
in a whole bunch of different
I
ways.
remember that, yeah.
And so I'm just worried. I think it's great not to have the 2 years, because I think you're right, nobody's going to remember that, and then it reduces your flexibility in dealing with subsequent disasters. But I just have a sinking feeling that if you do that, we need to see the model again, because I'm not sure what all the other impacts are. You remember, Will and Sylvia would remember that, you know, you had the model up and people would ask to change this factor, and then you just see all these other numbers changing because it's an integrated model, and I'm not sophisticated enough to understand all of that, but.
Yeah, as
Well,
long-
I think we definitely, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I think we definitely need to see the model, what that would look like if we were doing
Yes.
1.9. I know, I'm
That's
sorry.
a delay. That's a huge delay.
Then
we
if
need-
that's
we-
gonna
we
happen,
need-
let's just stay with the
When
numbers.
can you come back? How much longer?
Well, we need to know what to be prepared for, and I suppose that we just have to be willing to say, okay, we know this is coming, we know, we have to be prepared to explain it to our constituents, to explain it to businesses, so I don't see that we have to hold it up, but we're gonna need to see those models.
At
Here-
the end
here's
of
one option.
2024, though, we're still at the same spot.
Yeah.
By dividing the 9% increase over 5 years as
Yeah.
opposed to
Yeah.
three
Exactly.
in a row. So I don't know if we have to, I just don't see
Well-
how it could change the dynamics of this other than those first 2 years are going to have a little bit of different impact at the end of the whole process. But by 2024, where reserves are still going to look
We're
about
still
the same.
okay, and that's, I
In
forget what
fact, I
number
think you
slide
would be
that
a
is.
little better off because, as you mentioned, there's compounding. So when you,
Oh, yeah.
when you do rate increases sooner, you're starting sooner and that compounds. So
Yeah.
you'll look even better than this
Yeah.
financially. But then we'd have to review the bill impacts, because one reason why we left it at 0 was because the city council last time was pretty adamant about seeing bill decreases.
That's what they wanted. They want, yes,
So,
you're right.
now what I
The
might be
old
hearing
council
is-
said that.
Yeah, it was driven, but
No, John was at a different opinion.
So, what, from
one
your,
option
from your,
is-
from your experience,
why
if
not
you were
that 1
to
year
put it to
discount?
1.9, what would visually the customer see, and what would we see on the long term? How, the new model, what do you think basically is going to happen from the new model?
Well, so as I mentioned, those reserves that I just showed you, they would be a little better off, so you would be financially better off. And then these bill impacts that we looked at over here, I'm going to go to single family. Okay, so right now, your most common customer's bill is going to go down $5. When I put in 1.9% in there, instead of a bill decreasing by $5, it might be down by $2 or $3. If you give me 15 minutes, 10 minutes, I could even do it for you before I leave, and I could tell you what the mode customer
Why don't we take a break?
is if you wanted to take a break.
Bathroom break?
Sure, let's do it.
Please,
Get this
I've got
done.
time.
thanks.
And how come you didn't bring that last slide from last time that had all the numbers and everything else?
well,
What's
he
wrong
loaded
with
the
you?
whole program on, is what he did then.
The one that you kept changing the numbers when you said,
So
make
he
it
was running the program
45%, oh, make it
changes as we
30%.
watched.
In real time.
I was hooked up to your computer, and I was using the model real time up on the board.
Yeah,
Do we have that model then? Is it on file?
I'm
So
gonna- It's on my computer. and
we
I
don't
will
have it up.
that would, you could see it then.
I'm not saying that we have a decision. I'm saying that we need to see the other models
Prior to what?
to be released to the public. We want to be able to be prepared to answer any questions.
But you know what, if it's only, if adding 2% on those only makes a smaller decrease on the single family, which is where most of the people that show up are single families, they're actually going to see a decrease, so they're probably not going to be that concerned.
Well, I'm just talking about having the information ahead of time, in time, that when this gets rolled out, that we have full.
You just want to see some information to be able to explain it better.
Yeah, you guys didn't let
I'm
me
okay
finish.
with that.
Okay. Reacting.
All right. I'm going to be pushing for us to vote on everything you want today. Yes, no, or whatever it is, so,
All 5 of the questions?
yes,
Pick each one and vote?
yes.
You'd be happy with that?
Yeah, direction would be great, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it'll save another trip up here and it'll
Yeah,
get things done.
and then get things moving. Yeah, we're probably, what, a year and a half behind what we should be?
Yeah. We're already in the first year where we were going to get a discount. About 45%, about 40, 60, 30, 70. Well, let's see what it looks like. And when she said that, I go, oh no, we're not going to see all those again.
He wanted to shift it all to commercial, because that's what is producing water rates. It got a little too out of whack, I think.
Yeah.
That's why the council just sort of said, let's just defer this.
Steve here sounds like a communist. He wants to hang the landlords.
Well, the landlords aren't gonna get hung, because you know that any landlord with assault is gonna pass it through.
Yeah, but you know, in China, they just shot him.
Oh, okay. Well, that's,
China.
let's not adopt that system. I just can't get the prior meetings, out of my mind the way that we must have gone through, I don't know, 50 scenarios at one night.
we did,
It was amazing.
Yeah, we did. I remember that. Yeah.
Except for those two.
I tried to be quiet.
Not that, but he was told he could not speak. And if
I
you
didn't
two do
approach
not
the
get
mic.
up and talk at the microphone when you talk, I'm gonna get both of
Yeah,
you.
you have to,
You
because we're
cannot
not,
talk from the audience.
we have to record it, and you're not on the record when you're not at the mic.
Then I would have had to broke my thing and went up to the mic.
Yeah, well,
Hold on, if I couldn't, if I wanted to write down what you said, and I didn't remember it, I would have no way of doing that.
maybe we should do like the Johnny Carson show when they
I
used to
don't
go up
wanna
and
write
hand
down
mics to the
what
audience, Just give you guys one mic and you pass it among each other.
I'm kind of spoiled because they never asked me for a mic because I'm too loud. Anyways.
You're too loud? I think you're too loud. I think we need new mics here.
Yeah, our sound systems.
What do you think, Aaron?
I can be in the outfield and
New
yell at
mics?
the catcher and they'll never have a problem hearing me.
New microphones up here at this table?
We just put microphones on the seats so we can hear everybody's conversation.
Are you serious?
Yeah, Big Brother has arrived.
Yeah, the microphones here don't seem to work very well.
No, these ones are bad.
Yeah, we need new ones. Or does that solve the problem?
Well, I wanted to ask you, if you can afford to, I also know the insurance companies are just charging. If you can fire, control reduction zone, I just think it's dangerous to have a fire code always intersection of the city. Just want to explain that here. And you're charging these things.
My bill's going up $10.89, based upon my HCF.
Mine went down $489, so we got to pay for this.
That's okay.
Over.
Richard, what was your bill this month for water?
I don't know, at one point in time, my wife gets pissed off at me because I do water a lot. Huh?
Turn off your mic.
Oh.
Okay, honey, you wanna hear what he said?
She doesn't follow it.
Is he on the record?
I think we should call his wife.
I said, thank you.
Did you just hear what Rick said?
Well, you're the one who set me up asking me that question.
I'll post it on Facebook.
I'm just asking what your bill is.
2-something, I think. It used to be like when it was $100.
$250, $220.
I don't know, my wife pays it.
Come on, man. You're
I'll
supposed
find
to know
out
this
if it's
stuff.
that.
Yeah, I think I was paying
What do
like
you mean minimum?
$260.
Okay.
You know, the city of Bel Air is redoing their rates, and there's a big fight because all the big homeowners with the big lawns.
Oh, yeah.
We're saying, but most of our water is going onto the ground, and it's reseeping into the, and we're still paying this. So I'm going, oh, come on, guys.
So they're providing water.
Collection.
Big lawn, so you shouldn't pay as much? I don't think that's gonna fly.
Good or bad decision on my part, when I moved here, I picked the biggest lot in the development I'm in, because I love to garden and all that type of thing.
Likes to waste
And
water.
then, when I first
He
moved
used
in
to.
here, it was a set fee. The
Yeah.
100 I say, it's
All
no
you can
big
eat.
problem.
No
And
big
then all of
deal.
a sudden, you know, then it got hit, and then, so now every time I let the water on, like in the, you know, the faucet, or, why are you watering? Let the grass go brown, I don't give a
For
damn.
that water that you were using.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
The rest of them were paying for that water that you were
That's
using.
true, that's true, and I feel bad about that.
Rich, I had one of those houses that had, it was one of the larger lots in the whole development. And it had grass.
And I picked this, I spent $5,000 more because I got a 10,000 square foot lot.
Yeah, we paid a
Come
lot
over.
more for ours
I
too.
supplied the seniors with apples, plums, I mean, I have more vegetables,
Yeah.
but, you know, I mean,
C'est la vie.
Okay, you got something to show us?
Steve isn't back in.
That 3070 was Tom's. Because it had the biggest,
But Jim too.
I think we also discussed 4060, didn't we?
Yeah. Me too. I mean, that's where I was. I
I'd
was
have been
like,
okay
you know,
with the
let's just,
46.
yeah, no, but Tom and Jim were really,
Well, the good thing about, I mean, this is, I don't care, but the good thing about the lowering it that much is that it really drives the rate, usage. So that
The volume.
big water uses
Yep.
are hit harder.
That's true, that's true.
And so you have a conservation factor.
Why?
But it also is a big
Yeah.
change, and so, you know, you just have a policy decision.
yeah.
So one thing, I think that, we got hung up on before is usually in my experience with rate studies is that staff will make some preliminary decisions and pick like 3 scenarios and then bring that to city council. So you guys, I think one thing a problem we ran into before is city council had just this enormous option, you know, so many options to choose from that it was kind of hard to make a decision.
Yeah.
So in the
we-
future,
yeah.
perhaps staff wants to say, well, let's give them this, this, and this. And now you guys only have 3 options to choose from. It usually leads, I often find that if I give city councils too many options, it definitely takes longer to
Yeah.
make a decision.
I think we had about 21 or so variables we were looking at last time.
Yeah, and keeping track of it all, and it's just,
I know, your eyes were cross-eyed last time you were here. You did. You did. During the meeting, you know, when we were telling him to make all these changes on that real-time modeling.
It's fascinating to watch the model go. I mean, it's really,
It's fascinating.
those kind of skills programs, is to watch the model, and then you change a factor, and then watch it all readjust. That's really fascinating.
it's really easy to make mistakes, especially under pressure. So we try to not get into the model with city councils because you're like, oh yeah, I'll just change this. And then you get back in the car, you get back in the quiet of your office and you're like, oh, but when I change that, I've got to account for that. And I didn't do that in front of city council. So it's like, we try to stay out.
Okay, action.
Okay, so this slide here, so now I got 1.9% for each year. This slide here, your ending reserve balance fiscal year 2024, instead of 10.10 million, it's 10.94 million. No big change there, but that extra is from the compounding starting early on, like we thought. And then going to this slide,
100,000.
the single-family slide, your mode customers bill went down $5 in this version here, and with the 1.9%, it's going down $3, pretty much.
You were
right on where
with that.
I was gonna guess, so,
But again, we're changing from, what's our set fee right now? No, our set fee right now is? The fifth. We're 70% on the
60-40.
fifth.
You're
these
currently
same people that are gonna say
60-40.
maybe
No,
only-
we're 60, yeah,
You're
currently 60/40.
60-40, you're now
60-40.
going from 30-70. I didn't change any of that, I didn't change any of the special questions. The only thing I changed was that
Was
first year, going from
1.9%.
0 to 1.9.
Current model uses 37.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so the mode customer down $3.03, the average customer down $1.02 instead of $3.06. And so everybody else, so before we saw all these increases, now with the 1.9%, everybody's gently getting less of a discount, if that makes any sense. So if you want to look at somebody else,
But it still breaks at that monthly usage. So if you go down, it really doesn't change the story. It just says that when you get past the 6 and go to the 7, that's the last one that would have the savings. And then when you go to 8, that's when you start seeing a slight increase. So
yes, 7, a user of 7's bill would go up $1.
And it gives a heads up to everybody to start lowering their water usage.
well, conservation.
Yeah, which is what we want to be
In
pushing.
the materials that we have on the website, and that we mail in their water bill, et cetera,
Well,
explaining all this.
Well, it also continues the story of what we've been saying with the Port Hueneme Water Agency too, is that, we know that with the state and everything we've been doing for the last couple of years, we know that there's going to be some, forced kind of reductions on everybody. They had averaged that said, it's going to be about a 20% reduction right off the bat. So that's like the worst case scenario, but we know something's coming. So
so-
this could help.
Can we have a vote then, a motion and a vote on 30/70 split with a 1.9% increase every year?
Yes, for 5 years.
So this is really like moving everything. You want to move everything forward?
Can I make a motion for that?
Okay, second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we need a roll call vote, or all in favor say aye?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, what's the next thing you want us to vote on?
That's it. So now
That's
staff is directed to move forward with a Prop 218 notice, which Steve Hickox had prepared, and it's somewhere on his computer. And now you gotta send that.
Oh, gosh.
Right. Steve, can you just, especially since we have 3 still fairly new council members, just do a quick explanation of how the 218 process works, the noticing, and then the fact that people have the right to appeal, and
Yeah.
what the threshold is for that?
Yeah, I mentioned that in the beginning, but basically, staff is gonna prepare a Prop 218 public notice. It's usually about 2 or 3 pages, and it summarizes the proposed rates that are as a result of this 1.9% increase. So they're not exactly what you saw today, but they're a little bit higher. So it's going to be a 2 or 3 page sheet that talks about a little bit of background. The city's costs are going up, and we're paying more for water. Our labor costs are going up. As a result, we have to increase our rates. Here are the rates. Here's the private fire connection charge. Here's your old rates. Here's the new rates. Here's how you might be affected based on how much water you use for single family. That's mailed out to all customers of record. And to be safe, I would also mail it out to all property owners of record. And then you wait 45 days, and at that during those 45 days, they can call you, they can send in protest letters. Also, at the bottom of the public hearing notice, there's directions down there that shows if you oppose this, you can do such and such. Mail a protest to this address. You can also come to the public hearing. It states the date of the public hearing. The public hearing will be at 6 p.m. in this meeting place, and you can come and verbally protest. You can submit a written protest. And as I said,
What's your address?
435. I have one question. How do you measure whether or not you've surpassed the 50% plus one threshold?
You know your number of customers. I think it's like 3,000. So just ballparking here, if you get 1,500 plus one, that's a majority protest.
Do you recommend putting a checkoff box, I'm against this, or what's the most efficient method to get that done? I mean, I want to make it easy for someone to protest.
They just submit a written protest, and I'm pretty sure Steve created the public hearing notice already, so it could be reviewed by you. But in there, it gives a customer directions what to do. They just have to write on a piece of paper, I live at blah, 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 and I protest the rate increase. That's all they need to do.
The other question I ask, who provides the education process to the community to make them clearly understand why we're doing this and what the future benefits are and all of those types of things? I mean, do we have somebody from the city does that?
Yeah,
Who
it's
does that?
ultimately on the city staff's responsibility. So we have the mailer that Steve's talking about that goes out to everyone. We would put it on a website, put all that info on the city website, and then we could have one or more public little workshops, informational workshops, if the council directed us to do that as well. You're not required to do that, but
Yeah, what you could also do is you could have what's called an open house. And we've found that open houses are particularly effective because it gives customers a chance to talk with staff and city council members one-on-one. Public hearings tend to be, you only hear from the people that really want to get up here and speak, and they're angry. And
yeah.
Open house, you can have posters, you can educate people on this is our water system. Look, our tanks are rusting, our pipes are rusting. And you can have different stations. You can have a station about distribution, you can have a station about your RO plant, you can have a station about something else, and it might last a couple hours and customers come in, and you'll have a station on the rate study too. And by the way, you just looked at our water system, and at the end, we're increasing your rates. Why? Because look, all this stuff is rusting and so on. So we found that open houses are particularly effective.
Yeah, I like that too.
Can we consider a motion to have a open house on that here today? As a part of the Prop 218 process, I would like to propose that we have an open house meeting to address concerns and questions of the community.
May I request that you take off the as part of the 218 process, because that's a statutory process. We're going to add to it, which is great, but I don't want to muddy the waters with changing the actual required process. So if we could just say add this to the 218 process, that would be better.
Can I second that with the amendment you just made?
Yes.
And we got a second? Everybody in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Okay. We'll do that in a prompt time when the flyers are going out for their votes and stuff. We'd be having maybe more than one, maybe
Yeah,
a
we might be
couple of
able to.
HOAs.
But that notice will certainly indicate we're having this open house to come and learn about your water system.
You could put on there, yeah. And
Yeah.
people tend to, you'll get more attendance at your open house if you mention it on your notice, because
This,
Giving away crackers.
this may be a little bit overly doing it.
Oh,
Is
I
there-
had a question.
Is there the ability to have a staff person within the city on a particular HOA come out to an HOA, like a Wainimi Bay or whatever, to talk to them up front and personal, so that, you know, those, because people have a tendency, the open houses are very good, but people have a tendency to value their time, say, on a weekend or something like that, but on a meeting, they might be able to do that. Sure.
I would only request that any such thing be noticed to the public, because if there are small HOAs that you don't do that for, then you're not treating those people the same way in terms of the information provided. So you just treat the HOA as like a meeting place and put out a public notice.
But you could put a public notice out to all HOAs that
Sure.
we're going to provide that opportunity so that it's equally provided for, right?
If we know all the HOAs, then you give them the option to request it.
Yeah,
And then you only do
if
the
they
ones
choose
that
not to,
request.
I think we should just have one.
Absolutely.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question. What's the timeframe that we're looking at right now with all of this? So as we gave you the approval today, what do you think is the estimated timeframe of the Prop 218?
It's 45 days. It's a 45-day public noticing period. So, if you,
before you have the hearings?
right,
Yeah. Then you have the hearing process.
but you want to, I would think you would want
So
to
what's the,
do it a little longer than
what's
that.
the beginning to end? What are we looking at?
Well, you would have to prepare the Prop 218 notice. I think it's been prepared, so I'll let Don answer how long it would take him to prepare that.
If before Don, if I may suggest that before any notice goes out, that the council gets to review it.
Yes.
So, and our attorney, yes.
Of course. Mr. Hickox did prepare a preliminary 218, but we're going to have to refresh it, and I'm going to be working, we've got with your firm to review that with us. And so we have them on contract to assist us. So I'm imagining we're probably looking at a handful of weeks before we fine tune it and everything. And I also believe that we were going to print it in Spanish too.
That's what we did the last time,
Yeah.
and I suggested that, and we did, so I'm going to suggest that again, too.
I had planned to do it in Spanish, but that adds another component that we want to have it translated properly, and so that adds, so realistically, I would say we're looking at least 30 days before we're up and running. By the time we fine tune it, get everybody a chance to review it, and also have it translated for a timeline. I'll be working with Steve on it.
Okay.
Or, no, in September.
July
In
20.
September.
Okay,
And you have to plan for that open house
yeah.
too, so
Mhm.
if you think you can get it done within 45 days, then you're all set, but maybe you want to make it a little longer in case it might take you longer to do the open house. I don't know how prepared you are for an open house to get posters and.
I'm a little staff challenged still, so I'll have to look at what we're going to do. I'll rough out an outline. I'll work with Steve and my staff to see what we're going to put into an open house. I'll run it by the CM and the city attorney, and then I'm sure he'll disperse it to you for your comments on it, so you can get a preview of it. But we'll put together a kind of a bullet point for the open house. I do plan to bring some sections of broken water line that I have on my desk.
And pictures of what they look like otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, have another question for you, is that we're talking about actually implementing these water rates immediately or January 1? What's the,
It would be.
did we pick a calendar year?
I picked a date in the, it's, guess it assumes July.
It assumed July of 2019?
This is July, it's July 1st, so fiscal year 2020. So this coming July 1st is the start of fiscal year 2020.
So we need to get moving.
So that might be a little ambitious because it's right around the corner. So we could choose a different month in the model, but it's not really going to impact your balances all that much. January, okay, so let me put in January. See, one of those things that I didn't think about when I'm doing stuff in front of city council. Okay, so your fund balances are essentially the same, 10.94. It went down to 10.85, so.
Because certainly that would be good to put on the Prop 218, right? When your rates change, so, okay, thanks.
Anything else? Any other questions or comments?
Thank you for.
Thank you,
yeah.
council, for, this was quite a bit less dramatic and painful than what we were dealing with last time, so we appreciate it.
Okay. Sylvia?
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming back for, this length of time, and it's taken us a long time, but I think we have something that we're all pretty comfortable with, so I really appreciate your dedication to the city
My pleasure.
and getting us to this point, and Mr. Villafana, you too. Thank you so much for this.
Each one is a learning experience, so thank you.
If I could, I just wanted to say real quickly that at the break, I ran over and talked to the person over there at the counter that took my payment this morning, and I asked what my HCF was, and she in turn was training somebody, and she said 100
have
cubic
time for you.
feet, and it equals 748 gallons, and I thought that was really good. So it just emphasizes the point that when our staff knows what they're talking about, I think it will help us through the whole process. And so I just thought that was really cool that they knew what it stood for and the amount of gallons that are associated with it. So that was really neat.
So you have to tell us all now, how many HCF did you use? 11? Okay.
11. That's a lot of water. How many people you got living in your house?
It's that dog with dogs.
Okay, the time is now 4:34. This meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you.